Want to be inspired by extraordinary courage and real-life stories? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to A Good Place, where truth and integrity meet. This is a place where I'll be introducing you to thought-provoking and compelling premier educators, whistleblowers, best-selling authors, journalists, activists, and celebrities. And they all have one thing in common. They are people of truth and integrity, and many are considered modern-day heroes. And today, of course, we have one of these remarkable heroes in journalism. His name is Michael Yon. Michael is an American writer and photographer. He served in the Special Forces in the early 1980s and became a writer in the mid-1990s. He focused on military writing after the invasion of Iraq. Yon has been embedded on numerous occasions with American and British troops in Iraq, most prominently a deployment with the 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment of the 25th Infantry Division in Mosul, Iraq, that ended in September 2005. Yon has had vocal feuds with the U.S. military hierarchy, and the nature of his reports are also controversial. However, Yon at one time enjoyed rock star status among individual soldiers, according to Brian Williams of NBC. Yon's alternative media reporting has been mentioned by numerous mainstream media, and he has won accolades from 2005 and 2007 and 2008 Weblog Awards. And the New York Times reported that he has spent more time embedded with combat units than any other journalist in Iraq. He shifted the focus of his blogging from Iraq to Afghanistan in August 2008, and now the protests that are occurring in Hong Kong. And he has appeared in numerous articles, including the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, New York Post, National Review Online, NBC News, CNN, ABC, CBS Networks, and Good Morning America show. And the New York Times praised him and his reporting by calling it enough firsthand observations, clarity, and skepticism to put many professional journalists to shame. And he has won, again, multiple awards for his writing and is considered an American hero, at least in my eyes, and I'm sure many others. What a privilege to have you here today, Michael.
Wow, I can't believe I did all that stuff. But I did. I can't believe it. I'm in Hong Kong right now. It's more important over here than what's happening in Hong Kong right now is more important than anything I've ever seen in my life, actually. Hong Kong is standing up to mainland China. And in fact, I just got in from a protest, got about an hour of sleep and woke up. And I can't believe I'm on your radio show now.
I know you must be
46th
exhausted.
protest here.
46.
Yeah, but that's all right. You got to keep rolling. You got to keep fit for this kind of stuff. This is my 46th protest. So I've been going to protest after protest, and sometimes they go all day long, way into the night. Sometimes I don't even get to my hotel until the sun's rising.
Wow. Yeah, that's that must be stimulating to you, and you must be exhausted at the same time.
Yeah, you just come in and get some quick sleep, and
then you're up and
roll
running
right back out. There's so many protests. Yeah, there's so many protests. There's been hundreds of them. I've only been to 46 because you can't. There was numerous last night, and I could only go to one, right? And so, I go to what I can see, and then monitor the others through other friends that I have that go to the other protests and meetings and that sort of thing.
Well, maybe we can back up a little bit. Would you take a moment to set this up for the listeners? Like, many people don't fully understand what these protests are about precisely and are kind of only aware that there are massive protests occurring. We're just getting little snippets on the news. Plus, there's so many things going on here in America. So would you take a moment and do that for the listeners?
Sure. If you've monitored the news, what you'll see in the media, you might think this is about an extradition bill from Hong Kong to mainland China, basically, in a nutshell, that people can be arrested here for crimes and then taken over to China for trial, which is basically like, being arrested in Atlanta and taken over to China for trial. And the people rose up against that. But in reality, it's much deeper than that. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and they don't want to be absorbed by China. Hong Kongers will tell you every single day. They have T-shirts that say, "We're Hong Kongers, not Chinese," which really angers China. Because Hong Kong is its own little galaxy, you might say. And they speak Cantonese, not Mandarin. Their culture is different. I mean, they're about as Chinese mainland as I am British, and my family set sail in 1609 for Jamestown, right?
Mm-hmm.
British, and they're not Chinese; they're Hong Kongers, and but they won't say that out loud, because to say that you want independence is a high voltage thing to say. I mean, that'll cause you huge problems, to say the least, like being put in jail, right? So to call for independence is really extreme, but that is clearly what they want. Despite that, every time you have the camera on and you ask somebody that, they'll say no, no, no. And then you say, are you Chinese or Hong Konger? They'll say Hong Konger, which is just another way of saying we want independence.
But
and so there's a much bigger.
Go ahead.
What's that?
I was just going to say, comparatively, Hong Kong does have more independence than these other Asian countries and sovereignties, don't you think?
I would say, I've been to about 25 or 26 countries in Asia and about more than 75 in the world. I spent more than half my life overseas in different countries. And Hong Kong is one of the most civilized places I've ever been, possibly the most. And it's just a very educated population for the most part, very free. They have rule of law. However, they're being taken over by China because, the British negotiated with China that, they did the switchover in 1997, and the entire switchover for, the two countries, or one country, two systems, idea is scheduled to end in 2047, when Hong Kong will actually be quote unquote China. And so now people will send you messages immediately like, doesn't he understand that Hong Kong is China? Well, there was a time when, the king over in England would say, don't they understand that Virginia is part of my kingdom? You know what I'm saying? So what something is what you can physically make it, right? If you've got the power or the influence to set your own borders, then you can do it. And if you don't have that power or influence or ability, then you can't.
Mm-hmm. And an example of some of the freedoms is that you and I are able to have this phone call.
That's right. See, Hong Kongers could do that as well. Now, Hong Kongers could do that well. You could just as well have a Hong Konger here doing this, but you could not have a mainland Chinese doing this and saying his opinions the way we are. See, the Hong Kongers have the freedom of speech that we have, except for don't call for independence. But generally speaking, broadly, Hong Kongers have pretty much the same freedom of speech that Americans have, except for don't call for independence, that sort of thing. But mainland Chinese, absolutely not. For instance, here in Hong Kong, you can have Facebook. There's a lot of Hong Kongers on my Facebook, but not mainland Chinese. They don't have Facebook. They don't have Twitter in mainland China. They have all that here. So they have, like, a Hong Konger can just, if they want, fly over to San Francisco tomorrow, but a mainlander may or may not be able to fly. It depends on whether or not their social credit score has if they have the right social credit score to even get a passport, much less leave the country.
Well, that's remarkable.
So Hong
and I do
are
know
not as free as we are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And they also have been one of the major economic forces in Asia as well, even working closely with America. I know they have they really do. I mean, the city itself is beautiful compared to the rest of the country, and so or, comparatively to China. And so you can see. And I remember also my father did electronic engineering work with Hong Kong. So I know that they do have that. That's what makes them also different than some of the other countries or surrounding areas, I should say.
Oh, yeah. This is a beautiful city. It's still beautiful to travel to, and you should do it if you sounds like you've been here. So, I mean, it's a wonderful place. Americans, I wouldn't recommend necessarily coming today because I'm about to go to the airport. When we get off of this interview, soon after that, I'm going to go to breakfast, and then I'm going to maybe get another couple hours of sleep, and then I'm going to the airport because they're going to siege the airport today, right?
Oh,
so
wow.
If you're flying into Hong Kong today, you might not be flying into Hong Kong today. I don't know if you're going to be able to come in. Now, if you have loved ones coming in or you happen to be coming in, don't worry. You might actually see me. I'll be if they siege the airport, you might see me when you come in on arrivals. because they have done this numerous times out there. They'll flood the entire arrivals and departure halls, and but you'll be incredibly safe. No problem whatsoever. If you got children, it's totally safe, absolutely safe. It's just it'll be packed with protesters. Very safe, highly educated protesters. Very peaceful, except when they stand off with cops, and then they're ready to rock and roll.
Right. And then also, I would like to talk a little bit about the bill itself, this extradition bill. From what I read, that it actually started because a couple, and I don't have the article in front of me, a couple were murdered in Hong Kong or Thailand. In Thailand, is that what really started this bill, the development of this bill proposal?
It was in Taiwan, and it was somebody, a Hong Konger married his girlfriend. And Taiwan and Hong Kong don't have there's that another part of the puzzle is Taiwan. Of course, China wants to take Taiwan as well. And Taiwan is about as Chinese as seriously as the people in Jamestown, that landed in Jamestown are British. I mean, a lot of the Taiwanese came there like 400 to 450 years ago. So, you know what I'm saying? They're a completely separate culture. So anyway, there was that murder up in Taiwan, not Thailand. My office is actually in Taiwan is obviously a different country, but that was just an excuse for China to say, okay, let's get this extradition. China has wanted to do this extradition treaty for a long time because, for instance, right down the road from me now, there's a bookstore, and Chinese kidnapped booksellers and took right down the street from me right here. They kidnapped booksellers that were selling books that they didn't like, and took them off, disappeared them to China, right? Like they were Al Qaeda or something. And it was just books. And then they actually kidnapped some Hong Kongers over in Thailand, not Taiwan, but Thailand, where my office is. Mm-hmm. And they actually took them to China. So, I mean, and it was all bookseller related. That's all it was. People writing books and publishing and selling books that mainland China didn't like. So they kind of underlined the whole thing that they're criminals in China, right? Because they're writing that they're criminals, and then you get not arrested, but kidnapped for it and disappeared to China. That's basically the last sentence of the book, saying, yep, and all this is true, right? So you see this extradition, quote unquote, treaty would have huge ramifications, for instance, for the many thousands of Americans who live here, and British and Aussies, not to mention the Hong Kongers. Let's say you're an American businessman and they don't like you, or they just, recently, earlier this year, arrested some Canadian business people over in China, and clear, obviously, in retribution for the Chinese executive being arrested in Canada, if you're following what I'm talking about. I mean, so China will do these, political arrests and detains, where they, detain and accuse people of espionage. So they could do that right here. For instance, they could just arrest me if the extradition treaty was in place. They could charge me with espionage and then disappear me over to China because I'm saying anti-Beijing things. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, think about that for a minute. That's literally like scooping somebody up in San Francisco and you disappear off to China.
Okay. And so then, obviously, a protest emerged. And what month was that? Was that March?
June.
It started to emerge? June. Okay. And then, and then also it just started to grow. So in order to kind of share with people, I would like to understand the movement and how this protest is morphed to the veracity that it appears to us now. Maybe we can do that by showing some timelines of this event and what has instigated some of these responses from the protesters themselves.
Right. In early June, I was at my office in Thailand, and I saw the protest that was over 2 million people, right, estimated. And I said, wow, they're really upset. I've been to Hong Kong quite a few times since 2002, actually. And I'm a China watcher. My last two books are about the Chinese monster, basically. Unfortunately, they're in Japanese language and only in Japan. Like, they're not in English at this point. But I've been watching the Japanese monster quite a lot, and I've researched them in about 14 or 15 countries, mostly Asia, but also in the United States and Australia, with the information war and basically their incredibly aggressive acts. And so I started watching very closely because Hong Kong is a special weakness for China. It's like, I mean, if you look at the map, you'll see that it's, attached to China. It's not like off in the ocean like Taiwan is, right? You can literally drive to where I'm at. You can drive from Beijing to where I'm at, right? And stay on road the entire way without getting on a boat. And so this is a real brain tumor almost. As Hong Kong, as the protest and insurrection grew, at first it was just protest. As those grew, about 2 or 3 weeks later, I said, this is serious. And I jumped on an airplane and came over here. And so I've been here nearly the entire time since, with just a couple of weeks break, or less than that, maybe 10 days. And so I've been staying here watching this brain tumor grow. They were protests in early June. They were massive. And at first I was like, okay, what is this? Is this just protest like 2014, and then which was massive, the Umbrella Revolution, but then it sort of vanished, right? Or is this something that in 2014 I was covering this Thai protest, and I was literally sleeping on the ground with protesters at times. That went on for months. And so I didn't actually come for the Umbrella Revolution because I was covering the coup in Thailand, where my office is. And so, but in this one, I saw that what happened was the protests were on the continuum of this sort of conflict. They started with protest, as these things do, and then they morphed very quickly into general civil unrest, which is a different beast than protest. Protest is something that we see every day. It's part of life in a developed country like the United States. We need to have protests. It's part of our health. It's part of our country's health, actually, that we can do that. But protests are generally very specific. It might be something like about teachers' pay or bad roads or something. It'll be something very specific. And often the people that are making a particular protest are pretty specific. It might be just one particular bill. You know what I mean? It's very finite. It's generally a finite sort of people, like a group, maybe teachers, let's say, and not always, but generally. And it's about something specific. Now, when you get, something broader, like there's every sort of people, like every age group and ethnicity and profession, like it might be accountants and everybody else is protesting, and they're no longer demanding like better roads or better teacher pay, but something more broad, and they're focused on the government itself as opposed to something the government should do. And let's say you got millions of people protesting. Now you're going into what's called general civil unrest, which is much broader than just protest. Now, if you don't,
I wanted to interject really quickly. That it originally, I did find the article that I read this in, that demonstrations against the bill began in March and April. And so hundreds of thousands of people marched in protest of the bill starting in June. So now it was a demonstration that was in March. Yeah,
in June, it just like blew the lid off. And it really blew the lid off. And so, and that was when I said, okay, this is it. And I kind of parachuted in, so to speak. And again, I didn't come in flat footed because I've been watching this for years, not just in Hong Kong, but more broadly in Asia and globally with the China issue. So I came in with some good background study. And so the general civil unrest, which now you see millions of people out on the streets, and not just once. I mean, they're out like every day, not millions of people every day, but every day you'll have 500 here, 2,000 there, 800 here. You know what I mean? It's just like every 7 days a week. And sometimes there'll be like 5 in protest in a day, like 500 people here, 400 there, 200 here, 8,000 there. You know what I mean? And they're spread out across Hong Kong because it's bigger than just a city. We call it a city, but it's actually bigger than that. So that morphed, and now you see like teachers unions, like secondary school teachers unions. I've been to a couple of their protests, accountants, union, lawyers, bankers, all these different groups, and they come as a group like bankers, or they come as lawyers, or they come as accountants. All these groups have protested. Airline workers, gosh, how many? So many different ones. And so now, see, that's a symptom when you have these disparate groups from so many professional groups or MTR work, like they're basically transportation workers and that sort of thing. Now you're starting to see a symptom of general civil unrest. It's not now the mechanism that you're seeing is daily protest and that sort of thing, but it's not just protest anymore. It's general civil unrest. You got millions of people that are upset, all for their own reasons, and they're really upset now with the government itself, right? So now you're into that general civil unrest on the continuum of things. Now, when you go a little bit further on that continuum into the ultra-violent range, you drift into insurgency. And insurgency is a completely different animal, right? So you start with protest, you go through general civil unrest, and if it keeps going, then you can drift into insurgency. And now we're at the very front end of insurgency. We're at like category 1 of an insurgency. And if you look at, for people who were in Iraq, I spent a couple of years in Iraq between 2004 and 2009. And so, if you look at the height of the insurgency in Iraq from 2004 to 2007, that would be, let's say, category 5, like really just outright warfare, right? Assassinations of, political leaders, police stations being overrun, army units being wiped out, that sort of thing. I mean, that's category 5, right? So right now we're at the very front end of like category 1. The violence is limited. People are not dying yet. It's just, but they're doing things. Okay, in general civil unrest, that's when you're saying, hey, government, you're bad. You need to change. You're no longer just talking about the extradition bill or something along those lines. You're talking about the extradition bill, and I don't like you. You know what I mean? And so you're now you're starting to point at.
I just want to interject something before we move along here. You're saying that the protests are nonviolent, but the police force, this has become another huge issue. There's been extreme violence towards the protesters. I read that they're using gases and that they're using rubber bullets and just beating and throwing people into prisons without any kind of due process at all. And from what I understand too, the people are committing suicide as well. Is that to bring attention to the cause, or what's happening? It's just, there's so much information. It was hard to even wrap my brain around. I've had a week because we attempted an interview before, but it's just unbelievable. So let's start with police brutality, because I know the protesters are so upset with this, and for good reason.
They are. Okay, let's get to that. And let me say where we're at on that about the unrest. Okay. Because we are at the front edges of insurgency now. With general civil unrest, you're saying, hey, government, you're bad, and I want you to change. When you drift really into insurgency, now you're saying, not only do I want you to change, I don't want you to change. I want you out. You know what I mean? Insurgency is like, I'm going to overthrow the government. This is a revolution. So when you get into insurgency, that's when they start saying the police are illegitimate. You're wearing a uniform, but you should not even be in uniform. You're not my master, and I will fight you. And I'm not taking orders from you unless you've got a gun to my head, right? You know what I'm saying? So in other words, they've lost all moral authority, all legitimacy with the people. So they've lost legitimacy. So now you see them. You remember when we talked about the airport earlier and the train systems that are being shut down? See, these are symptoms of insurgency. In general civil unrest, you don't generally go shut down the only airport in the country, right? That's a symptom of insurgency because you're attacking the economy at that point, even though it's damaging you. You're damaging your own economy, but you're willing to basically do radiation treatment to kill the cancer, right? And so that's what's happening. So now we're in insurgency. When it comes to violence, now keep in mind, I'm doing more of these protests probably than just about any journalist out there. And I'm not actually a journalist. I'm a writer. There's a big difference. I'm out there constantly in these protests, long days, right? And so I've watched them drift into this. There is a little bit. It's not true to say that the protesters are completely nonviolent. There's a very small percentage who are, like I saw just 10 hours ago, they were throwing bricks at police, and then a policeman aimed his shotgun trying to aim at somebody behind me, right at me. That's the second time that's happened in the last or something. But, my video, if you were watching my channel, you'd see all of a sudden the shotgun.
We'll be right back. Hold on, everybody. We just have these station messages, and we'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. And this is A Good Place with Ella. And with me tonight, or today, I have Michael Yan, and he is a writer who is currently in Hong Kong, immersing himself in the protests. And we were just speaking. He was talking about the first time he was confronted with a gun, armed with rubber bullets, and his first experience with that. So go ahead. We'll get back to where we were. We'll pick up where we left off. Michael? We might have lost him. I'm not hearing him.
Wow.
There you are, sir.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
Now we're on. We're on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about some of your personal experiences being submerged in the protest itself.
Yeah, that's the way I did the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the conflict in Thailand and in other places as well. And it allowed me to be way ahead of the pack on saying what's happening, not because I've got a crystal ball, but because I could see it before most people, because I was there, really there, not just diving in for one or two or three or four protests, but like this is my 46th one last night, and I'm the end of the 47th today. And so I'm able to see what they're saying, what their graffiti is saying, how they're and what's going on, and how the police are acting, what the government is saying, and you can get a feel for it. And my feel at this point is that we're in the very front stage, like I said, of insurgency. It's not a serious insurgency at this point, but it's getting there, and it's definitely growing. Now, will it stop soon? And
can you hold your thought one second?
I don't know.
Hold your thought just one moment. Don is ready. He used to be my long-term co-host, and now he's going to be joining me today because he has a show called I Protest, and he has adamant interest in this topic. So let me join him real quick. We'll see if it even goes through.
Great. Okay.
Okay, just carry on. We'll see. He'll just join us whenever it goes through. Go ahead.
Okay. And these protests, again, clearly have drifted into the very front stages of insurgency. And again, there are specific symptoms of insurgency for those who have studied these sorts of things. I first started studying it when I was a Green Beret, because this was what we were trained to do, was create or fight insurgencies, right? And so I've read, huge amounts of material on it. That was basically my Ivy League school, was in this sort of fighting.
Okay. Yeah. So you have the background. You definitely are a military man, and I know you're a strong patriot. And with me now, Donald is here as well. Donald, I made the introduction, so welcome to the interview.
Oh, thanks, Elle. Thanks for having me.
Okay. So
hey,
we're
Donald.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well, from Hong Kong, and it sounds like you're very interested in protests. You need to come over with me.
Yeah, sometimes metaphorically, but also just, these are
I'm with you in spirit.
Mm-hmm. And so one thing I wanted to circle back on, because the demands have changed over the course of this unrest. So let's go over those and let's see what's been because there's new news, which we'll kind of develop. We'll go forward and get to that as well. So it did start with trying to squelch this bill. And then, of course, at one point in time, she did take it off the table, but she was not completely, what's the word I was looking for here? She she was still, number one, people do not trust this person very much, at least in Hong Kong. And so she was kind of hinting that she would withdraw the bill. And they were not happy with that because at that point, like you said, it became a civil unrest. So there was more demands at that point. So what were those 5 demands?
Another demand was to stop calling these riots. Because if you call them riots, then you can charge people. Like, for instance, last night before they fired the tear gas and I had to put my mask on and all that, they held up what they call the blue flag. And the blue flag is, they hold it up and it says in Chinese and in English, like, this is an illegal protest, because you have to get a permit to protest here. That comes back actually from British colonialism, is where that law came from. So you have to get a permit to protest. They did not have a permit to protest, and so they call it a riot, right? And so then they can charge you, and you can face, years in prison. So they want to, first of all, stop calling these riots. And now they've arrested about 1,200 people, right? And these people face, years in prison. And so they want to, another demand is to stop, basically release anybody they still have and to drop all charges. Now, this gets difficult because now you're talking different branches of the government, because the Hong Kong government is also, split up. They've got like a judicial branch like we have. So you can't tell President Trump to drop charges against, everybody. You know what I mean? I mean, he can certainly, he has a lot of powers, but he can't just tell the judges what to do, right? And so, nor can Carrie Lam, who is their chief executive here, which chief executive is basically the rough equivalent of a president, but it's, Carrie Lam is clearly a sock puppet for Beijing, right? And see, that's what this problem is all about. One of the problems is, so that gets into the next demand, which is universal suffrage. Their LegCo, Legislative Council here, they're not elected in the sense that our representatives and senators and whatnot are elected. Their mechanism for election is really more like appointment. And so, in other words, you and I, if we were Hong Kongers, we would not be able to vote for our senators and representatives directly. Everything's indirect. Like for instance, groups, they get to appoint their own representatives in the LegCo, Legislative Council. And actually, let's go back to insurgency as we talk about LegCo. Legislative Council is basically like the Congress, right? On July 1st, they broke into the protesters broke into the Legislative Council, which is like breaking into the Capitol building, right? And put graffiti up on the walls and that sort of thing. And I was with them. So they famously broke in on July 1st. And that was a clear sign of insurgency, because now you're directly attacking the legitimacy of the government as opposed to just protesting outside of the government with signs. You really broke into it and actually you can find a lot of the photos up online, and you might even see me in some of the photos. I was inside of the Legislative Council. So that's another one of the demand, of course, is to just squash the extradition treaty, which, the bill, which she can do that, but she can't do some of the other things. Changing universal suffrage is outside of her power. That's like changing the structure of the U.S. government. Imagine, protesters saying, and I want you to ungerrymander all of the, gerrymandered borders around the United States. No president that we have has the power to do that, right? And so it's so some of the demands that they make, and they realize this is a highly educated population here. They realize that the chief executive, Carrie Lam, doesn't have the power to just drop all the charges against all 11 or 1,200 people who've been arrested. She doesn't have that power. And they know that. And they know that she doesn't have the power to just wave a magic wand and say, okay, you've all got universal suffrage. So these are things that, again, we go from the mere protest to general civil unrest, hey, government, we don't like you. You need to change your ways, to insurgency, revolution. We're going to throw out the government, and restructure our government. So that's where we're at now. They're on the very front end of that.
Okay. And
Still there?
Yeah, can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to ask a question, Donald? I know you're coming in kind of late, but maybe you have some questions you want to ask?
Well, yeah, I missed obviously a lot. I'm trying to get a gist of what's going on here, but are you? Do you think that, because we see these protests in Hong Kong and certainly we saw them in France, do you see a yellow jacket movement type of thing ever coming to America? Because a lot of us here are itching to protest many things domestically here. Do you think there's a chance of that, or what would have to happen here to reach a tipping point for Americans to really start protesting?
Well, our whole country was founded on protest. I mean, I had family that fought in the Revolutionary War. Our family, our whole system depends on protest.
Right.
So that's almost like a branch of government is protesters, right? So as you know, throughout our entire history and into the future, we'll always be protesting. It's important. It's part of our vitality. But will it ever go into actual insurgency? Now, we've had all sorts of people through time again, our country was founded on a revolution, right? And that's how we were born. And we've had various, say, insurgent factions throughout time, but none have ever been powerful enough that they were able to, be taken completely seriously on the broad scale, right? Because our country is so diverse and large, and there's, we have so many ethnicities and various other, how our cultures, a lot of people think our culture is very simple in the United States. It's actually incredibly complex. And so we don't generally have a real, even general civil unrest where, let's say, okay, when you get 2 million people on the streets in Hong Kong and you've only got a population of 7.5 million people, imagine how that translates into America of like 100 million people on the streets, right? We've never seen something like that in America. And so we're not to that. We've never reached that level in the United States that's just so overwhelming that we will actually fundamentally change the government in one fell swoop, like revolution in the way that we were originally born. But that's where we're at in Hong Kong, is where, they're looking at, they're not actually openly saying it, but they're saying it in different words. They're saying it, actually some of the graffiti just yesterday was about revolution. But they won't say independence. To use the term, very few of them do not very few. If you use the word independence here, like we want to be independent from China, that would be like 1950s Texas, and you come out in church and say, I'm gay, right? It's that much of a voltage problem here to say you want independence, right? And so, although so many people are thinking of, because they chant every night at 10 o'clock, everybody comes out their windows at 10 o'clock, not everybody, but you can hear it all across Hong Kong on the streets. They're yelling out their windows, free Hong Kong, free Hong Kong. Remember that movie Networks where he's like, I can't take it anymore or whatever. And everybody's yelling out the windows. We do that every night at 10 o'clock here. And so, we've reached a point here where this is like nothing I've ever seen in America. I've seen a lot of protests in America, but nothing like this.
That seems massive. But one thing I really want to point out, in case we kind of brushed over it quickly, is that finally Carrie Lam, the Hong Kong leader, did announce on Wednesday that she would finally withdraw the bill. But as we've already discussed, this is a movement. This is civil unrest at this point. How do you think, when that occurred, did you see any change in the manner that people were expressing themselves or the protesting itself? Can you tell me what happened on that day?
Yeah, that was just a couple of days ago. So that's pretty fresh. And a lot of people were asking me immediately, will this change, what's happening here? And I said, my finger's on the pulse here quite well. And I was like, no, it will not change. It's basically, their patient has been in a terrible accident and losing a lot of blood. And you're like, give it 1 pint of blood and think it's changed everything. It's not. This is it's not going to change or help anything. It's too late. I mean, it's way too late because we're beyond that protest point. Remember during the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003 in the United States, there was these massive protests across. Like I was in some of the protests out in California, just looking at those as an observer, and there were protests across America and across the world building up to the Iraq War, right? But those were just protests. They were about something specific. They were about the Iraq War, right? Those were just protests. They weren't about, and let's overthrow the government, right? Mm-hmm. So what I'm getting to again with the extradition bill, we're way beyond just the extradition bill. They don't even bring that up much here anymore. I mean, they bring it up every day. But at this point, it's more like revolution and, the extradition bill. You know what I mean? Whereas in the beginning, it started off with extradition bill. Now it's like revolution. Yeah, and then there's that extradition bill thing too, right? Mm-hmm. So that's become a back burner.
So that's only one of the demands that have been met. And then the setup for independent inquiry to probe police brutality. And it has to be independent because of the way that they do things and squelch things in Hong Kong. And then the withdraw. Okay, we did that. Also, withdraw the characterization of riots, which was amended. And then release those arrested. But there's more. It's interesting. Depending on what article you're reading, what the demands are listed quite differently.
The demands are irrelevant at this point. Anybody talking about demands is way behind. They're way behind. Okay. Just like people that talk about the.
This was a month ago.
Yeah. But they still talk about it. I still see articles come out every day and they're like the 5 demands. I'm like, they're way behind if they're talking about that. Because we're way beyond that. Even though they still talk about the 5 demands, they talk about them every day. But in reality, we've drifted mostly through general civil unrest, and we're starting into insurgency. We're getting to the point where it doesn't matter if they met all 5 demands tomorrow. They want revolution. You know what I mean? So we're beyond that. Now, will they continue? I don't know. But I know where we're at because I'm in the protest every day. And
well, what's going to happen next?
In fact, across the street from me here is the Chinese liaison. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, with all this happening, what's going to be the pivotal turning point and what's going to happen next? I mean, even if all the demands are met, what now?
First of all, they will not be able to meet all the demands. That's like a physical, structural obstacle that's too big to hurdle over. Because, again, some of the demands, for instance, the inquiry, that's not within the power of Carrie Lam. She doesn't have the power to drop charges against everybody. She doesn't have power to do universal suffrage, structural changes to the government. She just doesn't have that power. Nobody can wave a magic wand because this takes all aspects of the government to make a self-change. And there's too much embedded self-interest to self-change like that. And so what happens from here, if it continues along the lines of other countries, I think if it continues the way it is now, it will drift into more of a category 2 insurgency, and we'll see more and more economic attacks on their own country. Police stations will continue to come under, they're being sieged all the time. Like I was at a police station siege yesterday. I just got back in a few hours ago. And eventually they'll probably start attacking police and that sort of thing, attacking the legitimacy. For instance, if you fly to Hong Kong today, you may have problems getting to the airport because they're going to siege the airport today, right? And so they're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is the Hong Kongers are attacking their own economy to basically use radiation treatment on their own country to try to get rid of this government. They're attacking the legitimacy. They're showing that the government no longer is in charge, that the people are in charge. In other words, they're wresting control, and they're undermining the economy and the legitimacy of the government elements, such as the police and the courts and whatnot. So what happens next? Next phases would be increasing what they're doing now, shutting down roads, shutting down the airport, shutting down the trains, possibly at some point shutting down boats. And so just basically squeezing the economy. Now, they most of the Hong Kongers love that Donald Trump is attacking China with the tariffs. And they want, believe it or not, they want Trump to attack Hong Kong too, which means calling for fire on their own position here, right? Like calling an artillery strike on Hong Kong. The Hong Kongers want that, an economic strike, because even though it's going to badly damage them, it will cause severe damage to China. And so they're willing to take that damage, and they say that every day. They're willing to suffer that damage in order to take out the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They want to take out Chairman Xi, right? And they know that they're going to have to suffer to do that. That's why you see graffiti everywhere, all over this town, and people saying it. If we burn, you burn. If we burn, you burn. I've heard that like thousands of times now. We burn, you burn. And it's written all over the place down the street by my hotel, right? And they're they're saying explicitly, if we don't get to change our government, we're going to basically destroy Hong Kong, is basically what they're saying. I mean, not basically, that's what they're saying. They're saying if we can't have Hong Kong, you can't have it either. We will destroy our own house to burn you down with us. They're very clear, and they're making moves to do just that. So that's insurgency. That's hardcore insurgency right there. But we're not completely there yet, but we're right on the front edge. Again, they'll probably shut down the airport again today.
What's interesting, I was just thinking back to what you said a little bit ago, that because you're entrenched, you actually have a better understanding. Because what I was reading just this morning on CNN is that they're just asking for these 5 demands. Everything is going to be okay if these 5 demands are fulfilled. So it's interesting. You being there this is the best information anyone can hear because it's accurate. You're there. You actually know what's going on. So this is just wonderful.
It's important, and you also have to have studied these. Yeah, and you have to have studied these things for years as well, which I have, and I've been in many insurgencies, Iraq, Afghanistan, Thailand, Nepal, Philippines, you know what I mean? I lived in Poland, and I studied Poland for years in their fight against the Soviets, and then I lived in Poland for a couple of years, and so I've studied these things for years. And so when I come into the operating room, so to speak, I'm like a doctor walking in, and I can see the patient, and I can see things that, like a reporter might not see. The reporter will go, hey, this guy's sick. And I'll say, yeah, he's sick. And let's check this, that, and the other. And I'll know what to start looking for, right? And because this is not my first barbecue. And so I know all the, if you understand this type of conflict, and it takes a lot of study, but it's like understanding, let's say in zoology, if you understand a mouse, to use this metaphor, if you understand a mouse, then you can understand a lot about an elephant or a giraffe or a platypus, right? Because they all share certain common parts, like a heart, a nervous system. They need oxygen. They give off waste. And it's the same with these sorts of conflicts. So if you can understand one, then you know what to look for in the next one, even though they look very different on the outside.
Mm-hmm. So do you plan on staying till the bitter end?
Well, let's see how long it lasts, because this could last for years. And I mean, in reality, it probably will, which would mean basically setting up shop here. And I'm looking at the larger picture of the China issue, not just Hong Kong. Hong Kong is it's a serious brain tumor for China, because the courage that the Hong Kongers are showing, there's others who are watching very closely, such as the Taiwanese. And so I might fly out to Taiwan or so in the next week or two just to check their pulse again. I haven't checked the pulse up there, and it's been a couple of years since I've really gone around Taiwan and really checked and see what the people are thinking and feeling. But there's clear support for Taiwan, for Hong Kong. And I want to go back to Taiwan and check their pulse, see how they're doing, how you feeling, what are you thinking, that sort of thing. And up to Japan again. I talked with people in Japan yesterday for a couple of hours on the phone just before I went to the protest. And I want to, because this is a much broader, Hong Kong is very important. Again, it's a key battlefield. At this point, the key battlefield. But there's many other ones. There's Taiwan, there's Philippines, there's Japan, of course. And then there's what's going on in Korea, between Japan and Korea, and which I've written 2 books about. And so, for me, it's a much broader field than just Hong Kong. But Hong Kong is a vital element in what's unfolding with CCP. Now, I want to see CCP undermined to the point where where there's a revolution in China, right? Not just a revolution in Hong Kong, because it's possible that do you know who Gordon Chang is? I just had breakfast with him and dinner with him a couple times this week, and he just flew back to America about 2 days ago now, and he's a China expert.
We just have
and
a
we
minute
were talking
left.
about this in detail.
Just want to.
And we both believe that it's possible that CCP itself can be undermined to the point where CCP dissolves, which can help us with a much larger problem set with the South China Sea and the BRI and so many other things. So I'm looking at China and Hong Kong.
Did you hear that? We
like
just have a minute left, so we have to finish up.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just going to have to come. You just have to come back on. And in closing, will you let everybody know where they can go? I understand you have blogs and you're a writer. How can they keep up on these events?
Actually, believe it or not, I'm live streaming on my Facebook all the time. So Michael Yan on my Facebook, like I'll be live streaming from the airport today, and I'll be putting the camera. What do you want? How do you feel?
That's great. Awesome. Thank you. And then everybody, I want you to hold on because I'm going to the next show. Donald Jeffries and myself will be together on his show, I Protest. Thank you, Michael.